Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 22, verse 17, and going all the way to chapter 24, verse 34. In our outline of Proverbs, notice that whole center section of one verse maxims, chapter 10 through chapter 24, and then we subdivided that into the righteous versus the wicked, living the wise life, and this last section that we're coming to right now, the words of the wise. That's going to be chapter 22, verse 17, all the way to chapter 24, verse 34. We're going to try to cover that all in one segment, and this will conclude the Proverbs of Solomon. What we are basically being told here is what not to do. We're going to see a lot of that. Beginning in verse 17, incline your ear, and notice we're starting with a purpose statement. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. So this is going to introduce a new section. Apply your mind to my knowledge. So notice, incline your ear, hear the words of the wise, apply your, by the way, the words of the wise is what we're calling this whole section. That's a good title for that. And then he continues, apply your mind to my knowledge. It will be pleasant if you keep them within you, that they may be ready on your lips. So keep them, put them on your lips, so that your trust may be in the Lord. And then he concludes, I've taught you today, even you. So this is a good purpose statement. It's an introduction. That your trust may be in the Lord. I've taught you today, even you. Verse 20, have I not written to you excellent things? Now that term excellent things, that Hebrew term, shalashim, can have a few different readings and can have a few different meanings. Shalash is just the word for three, and then when you plural, it can mean the third man in a war chariot, like the officer. You can use it to describe a musical instrument. Maybe, I don't know if it had three strings or three something. um, a threefold expression, just an expression of multiplication. So I'm doing something in threes, we could say. And then Shilashom, notice this is Shalashim, but Shilashom, if it had noticed, you just have a little tiny change. Instead of an im ending, it's an om ending. That yod turns into a vav, and that can be an idiom for up to now, like literally it would be 3 days ago, but it has the ideas like up to now. Now, the Tanakh translation renders this, indeed, I wrote down for you a threefold lore. And then he continues, wise counsel. And I can see where they're coming from. That's following the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate that have a similar rendering. That is the Greek translation and the Latin Vulgate. So notice they're sort of borrowing from that to be their authority source. The New International Version says, have I not written 30 sayings for you? Remember I said shalashim, if it's the plural, it can actually refer to 30. 30 sayings for you, sayings of counsel and knowledge. And when they do that, they're actually borrowing from an Egyptian work, the instruction of Anemop. And it might be that this section is, even though Solomon's giving it to us, that he himself had borrowed it. There are certain similarities between that work and what we have here. And it wouldn't surprise me that Solomon, in collecting wisdom sayings, had collected a whole segment from Egypt. That would work nicely. And let me just say, when we count the sections, we're going to see, depending on how you count them, we're going to see 30 sections. So here we're reading this as Shalashim, the 30, not as the threefold, but that works. And I think they might be right here. Now we continue. We're still introducing the new section. Have I not written to you excellent things of counsels of knowledge to make you know the certainty of the words of truth? So have I not written counsels, knowledge, to make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you may correctly answer him who sent you. Verse 22. Do not rob the poor. And this is our first saying. Let me just say, it's going to be the first of 30. Do not rob the poor because he's poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. And so notice that's the action. Don't, and we're going to have a lot of don't do these things. Don't do those actions. Rob the poor, crush the afflicted. Verse 23, here's the result. For the Lord will plead their case and take the life of those who rob them. Next section, second saying, do not associate with a man given to anger or go with a hot-tempered man. um, just, avoid such people. That's the action. Notice, don't do that. Here's the result, or you will learn his ways and find a snare for yourself. Sometimes bad actions can be contagious. Bad attitudes can be contagious. Bad words, you hear them, and after a while, you're beginning to repeat them yourself. Third saying, do not be among those who give pledges, among those who become guarantors for debt. So don't guarantee other people's debt. We would say don't co-sign if you're going to have to pay for it. Don't take up their debt. That's the action. Don't do that. Verse 27, here's the result. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take, that is, whoever the debtor is going to be, why should he take your bed from under you? Might not sell you into slavery, but might take that which you own and that which, frankly, you require. Another way of saying this is don't extend credit or don't lend money when you can't afford to lose it. Now, if you can afford to lose it, that's fine. There have been times where I have loaned money and not really, I mean, if I get it back, that's nice. If I didn't, that was fine too. Uh, so, if you can afford to lose it, then great. You can be giving and you can be generous and do so. That's another proverb. The fourth saying, do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set. Now, the boundary, that's actually taking somebody's land. And yet, the boundary stone would actually set forth where that land was going to be. Verse 29, do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. And so notice the action. Do you see him now? The first one doesn't really have an action to it, but verse 29. Do you see a man skilled in his work? Here's the result. He's going to stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Chapter 23. I know that was a short chapter because we had already covered the first section in a previous lesson. We're moving now to chapter 23, verse 1, our fifth saying, when you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. So notice, don't desire his delicacies. When you are you're sitting down to dine with the ruler, don't overextend yourself. Be humble, be appropriate. It's like cutting your own throat if you're not. Um, just watch what you're doing, watch how you are acting in the presence of a ruler. 16, verse 4, do not worry yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it. That is wealth. So that's the action. And then notice the result, verse 5. When you set your eyes on it, it's gone. That is, as soon as you start looking for wealth, now, if you're working just to work to provide for needs, that's great. But when you set your eyes on wealth, it's gone. For wealth, and notice that's italicized, but it's the same topic. We haven't changed topics. For it certainly makes itself wings like an eagle that flies toward heaven. Um, you've heard the old expression, money talks, but oftentimes it says, well, so long. I'm taking off now. And wealth can be like that. It is not a good thing to pursue wealth. There are other things better to pursue. Seventh saying, verse 6, do not eat the bread of a selfish man. This reminds me a little bit of the one couple of proverbs ago, the fifth saying of the ruler. Do not eat the bread of a selfish man or desire his delicacies. That's the action. Here's the result. For as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says to you, eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. Notice the selfish person says, go ahead, have a meal. But really, he's sort of selfish, stingy. He doesn't mean it. His heart isn't with you. Verse 8, you will vomit up the morsel you have eaten and waste your compliments. Selfish people, watch what you take from them because they're going to hold it against you. That's the point. Eighth saying, verse 9, do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. Um, Similarly to what Jesus said, Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6, where Jesus says, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine. Now, let me just say that the wisdom here is recognizing a dog or recognizing the swine. Notice that he finishes up, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. I like the way one of my old professors used to say, don't give don't cast your pearls before those who are satisfied with costume and jewelry. That's a good point there. Maybe a little bit more polite way of saying it, but the same idea. So you have the action and then the result. You know, don't waste your time trying. Somebody said, don't waste your time trying to teach a pig to dance. It annoys the pig and it wastes your time. Verse 10, ninth saying, do not move the ancient boundary or go in. Now, we already saw one just like this, or go into the fields of the fatherless. Back in verse 28, in chapter 22, verse 28, we said, do not move the ancient boundaries which your fathers have set. Same idea here. Or go into the fields of the fatherless. So that's the action. By the way, when it says the fatherless, uh, let's see, yit omim, literally the orphans, means the same thing. I just wanted you to know the word father isn't there. But that's the action. And now the result, for their Redeemer is strong, he will plead their case against you. It's not that they can do anything to protect themselves. That's the point. They can't. But don't take advantage of them, because God is going to take the place of their father. He's going to come in and judge accordingly. Verse 12, this is our 10th saying, apply your heart to discipline and your ears to words of knowledge. Do not hold back, and notice how discipline is repeated here. Do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. You shall strike him with the rod and rescue his soul from Sheol. So notice the action, apply your heart to discipline, both for yourself and also for your children. Don't hold back discipline from the child. He sounds like he even feels like perhaps he's going to die. I can remember some of the discipline, some of the spankings that I received as a child. And let me just say, I needed them. um, but there were some good lessons that were learned there. So you have the action and then the result. You'll rescue his soul from Sheol, from death. 11th saying, this is quite an extensive one here. My son, if your heart, and notice it starts off with the son theme. Again, we just talked about dealing with your sons. My son, if your heart is wise, my own heart will also be glad, and my innermost being will rejoice when your lips speak what is right. And here's the proverb part. Here's the do not. We've been waiting for that. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but live in the fear of the Lord always. Surely there's a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Listen, my son. Notice how we start off with the son, and we come back to the son. Listen, my son, and be wise, and um, direct your heart in the way. So we have that reference to the heart back in verse 15, and again in verse 19, sort of pulling this in. And remember the central lesson there: don't let your heart envy sinners. Instead, live in fear of the Lord. Verse 20, our 12th saying, do not be with heavy drinkers of wine, or with gluttonous eaters of meat. Notice it's twofold there. Now it's not saying you can never drink wine. It's not saying you can never eat. Just don't do, with drinking. Don't be tipsy. Don't be drunk. Don't let that affect you, especially, let me just say, in our 21st century culture, if you're driving. But in any case, even if there's a designated driver and you're not it, that doesn't mean you should be getting drunk. You shouldn't be letting things like that control you. Or, notice, This is one of the places where it speaks about overeating. There's not a lot that mentions that, but occasionally you'll see references to overeating in the scripture. Don't do that. Verse 21, for the heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty. So there's the action. Here's the result. The heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty. Why? Because they're, well, maybe two reasons. Maybe because they're eating all their produce. Uh, and then notice, and drowsiness will clothe one with rags. Um, but also, when you've eaten too much, when you've drunk too much, you're actually diminishing your ability to go out and provide for yourself. And notice, and drowsiness will clothe one with rags. It's leading just to bed and hangovers and all sorts of nasty things, or even indigestion, with regard to overeating. So just some sayings of wisdom. Our 13th saying, verse 22, listen to your father who begot you. Notice the call from parents here. And do not despise your mother when she is old. So your father is mentioned, your mother. Buy truth and do not sell it. Get wisdom and instruction and understanding. And notice we come back to the father again. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who sires a wise son will be glad in him. So, this is sort of to parents, but it's saying make your parents proud. Make your parents proud. We come to the 14th saying, and we're still on the same theme of the parents. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her rejoice who gave birth to you. Give me your heart, my son, and let your eyes delight in my ways. 15th saying, new topic, for a harlot is a deep pit, and an adulterous woman is a narrow well. Notice that's the description. Surely she looks as a robber. The result is seen in the very last line, and increases the faithfulness. Increases the faithless among men. So, these sorts of things can be a temptation, and you're warned against that temptation. She is a deep pit. She's already a narrow well. She's already a robber. Don't be among those who are faithless. Now we come to number 16. These are wine warnings. Verse 29, who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? So I have a series of rhetorical questions. Those who linger long over wine, uh, yayin is the Hebrew word for wine. And then those who go to taste, and I have a different term used, that's the only reason I put it up here, uh, uh, mimsach, just a different word for, notice they've translated mixed wine, but I just want you to see it's a different word. Still in wine warnings, do not look on the wine when it is red. Um, when it sparkles in the cup, notice this is the action when it goes down smoothly. So don't do that. And then we're going to see the result. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. That doesn't mean it doesn't taste good. It may well taste. Let me just say, I don't really care for the taste of most alcohols. Very few have even been inviting to me. But this isn't talking about the taste. It's talking about the result of having drunk too much. Bites like a serpent, stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. I'm not sure if everybody has, blurred vision, but oftentimes people have blurred responses and blurred mental capacities that leads them to say things or even think things that they wouldn't otherwise, where they wouldn't otherwise go. We're still in the wine warnings, still at number 16, and notice this is part of the continuing result. And you will be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. And here's what you're saying in such situations like that. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I'm just going through all sorts of bad experiences. When shall I awake? And notice at the end of it, I will seek another drink. The very thing that got you here, you're going to try to repeat again. Maybe it's catching this idea that wine can be addicting, and which leads not just to a single episode, but to drunkenness, and that can be an even worse thing. Now we come to chapter 24, and we're going to finish up these sayings. We're on the 17th saying. Do not be envious of evil men. That's the or nor desire to be with them. So that's the action that we're warned against. The result in verse 2, for their minds devise violence and their lips talk of trouble. The, number 18, we're actually going to enter a whole segment here, the house of wisdom. And so notice that there's a building theme. By wisdom, a house is built. By understanding, that is, the house is established. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. And those are all good things. A wise man is strong, and a man of knowledge increases power. So you've got a wise man, notice wisdom, understanding, knowledge, a wise man, a man of knowledge, some repetition here. For by wise guidance you will wage war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. So this house is built up, and then it gives strength and guidance and counseling and all sorts of good things that come forth as a result. Now, for 19, we go from the wise house to the fool. Wisdom is too exalted for a fool. He does not open his mouth in the gate. One who plans to do evil, men will call a schemer. Notice how we went from fool to schemer. There's an ethical component to foolishness. So schemer is somebody who's designing plans, but they're bad plans, and so people refer to that he's planning for their ruination. Verse 9, the devising of folly of sin, and the scoffer is an abomination of men. So notice he's called the schemer, the scoffer, the fool. Verse 10, if you are slack in the day of distress, your strength is limited. So all pictures of the fool. Verse 20, not verse 20, it is actually verse 11, but uh, this is proverb number 20 in our whole listing of this section. We have a question set forth. Deliver those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to slaughter, oh, hold them back. Sort of, are you going to do that? Are you going to stop them? And here's number 21. If you say, see, we did not know this, does he not consider it who weighs the hearts? Here comes the question part. And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to man according to his work? So notice that last one, verse 12. We actually have that quoted in Romans chapter 2, verse 6 by Paul, as he's pointing out that the Lord will render to man according to his work. That God is the judge, and that's something that is pointed out here in the Proverbs. Our 22nd saying, verse 13, my son, eat honey, for it is good. Yes, the honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Now, um, I don't think that's honey, by the way, was a one of the few delights, almost like a dessert, but I don't think it's just talking about dessert, but perhaps it's picturing honey as a image, verse 14, of wisdom. And so I think this is part of a call for wisdom. Verse 14, know that wisdom is thus for your soul. If you find it, then there will be a future and your hope will not be cut off. Reminds me of how in the Psalms, your word is sweeter than honey, and that sort of image is linked there. For our 23rd saying, verse 15, do not lie in wait, O wicked man, against the dwelling of the righteous. Do not destroy his resting place. Don't try to do evil. Don't try to trap other people in bad places. That's the action. Don't do that. Verse 16, here's the result. For a righteous man falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in time of calamity. Don't be the wicked one that's trying to get others to fall, because you're the one that's going to fall. And so notice that's the result. 24 saying, verse 17, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Notice how the first line states the principle, the second line just restates it, same thing, that's the action. Verse 18, we see the result, or the Lord will see it and be displeased and turn his anger away from him. Now, that's not saying that, in other words, your enemy might be getting judged, but don't you be rejoicing because, frankly, you could be judged too. Um, Vengeance and that's in God's hands, and let Him handle it, and don't you try to rub that in. Verse 19, our 25th saying, do not fret because of evildoers, or be envious of the wicked. That's the action. Here's the result, verse 20, for there will be no future for the evil man. The lamp of the wicked will be put out. Verse 21, our 26th saying, my son, fear the Lord and the king. Do not associate with those who are given to change. Now, this brings up a question. Don't associate with those who are given to change? Wait a minute. Does that mean all change is bad? Let me just say, my tendency, my natural, it's not that I hate change, but my natural tendency is just to do the same thing again and again and again, as long as it works. For example, if there's a restaurant I like, my tendency is to just go to that restaurant and order the same thing each time I go. Um, I'm not much for just change for the sake of change. And notice that, uh, and he starts off, fear the Lord and the king. I think that's telling us where this is coming from. Do not associate with those who are given to change in those areas, perhaps. And so that's my action. Verse 22, I'm going to see the result. For their calamity will rise suddenly, and who knows the ruin that comes from both of them. I think perhaps this is a change against authority in view here, given the first line. Don't follow those that want to get away from the Lord. Don't follow those that want to try to overthrow government. God has established government. Yes, there can be some governments that aren't very nice. Leave that up to the Lord. Verse 23. By the way, I didn't mean by that you can't vote, but to overthrow government, that's something else. Verse 23, our 27th saying, these also are the sayings of the wise. Now that's actually a new subsection. We've been going along with sayings of the wise, and now we have an addition to that's going to help us extend that number to 30. To show partiality in judgment is not good. Um, and then we see an expression of that. He who says to the wicked, you are righteous, peoples will curse him, nations will abhor him. Don't be trying to look at bad things and somebody who's bad, doing bad things, and saying, good job. We live in a society where that sort of thing is done on a regular basis, where what used to be called bad is being called good now. That's a terrible thing. That's the bad. Verse 25, but to those who rebuke the wicked, um, notice people will curse them, but to those who rebuke the wicked will be a delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. So that's good. And then notice a good blessing comes upon them. And then verse 26, he kisses the lips who gives the right answer. Notice the right answer is between what you say in judgment to the wicked, what you say in blessing to the righteous, um, and you choose the right one. In your judgments, make sure that you call bad bad and good good. Make sure that you judge rightly. Our 28th saying, verse 27, prepare your work outside and make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterward, then build your house. Now, what's the point here? It doesn't have a warning. It just says prepare your work outside, make it ready for yourself in the field, and then build your house afterward. I think what it's showing is that preparation pays off. In other words, do things in the right order, preparing when necessary, and then following through. Our 29th saying, verse 28, do not be a witness against your neighbor without cause. That's the principle. And also don't deceive with your lips. So two things. Um, verse 29, do not say, thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. And then we finish up, I will render to the man according to his work. Notice, don't try to do bad things against your neighbor. And also don't try to do bad things against your neighbor, even if he deserves it. Even if maybe he's done you wrong. You be gracious and forgiving so that God can be gracious and forgiving to you. That's how Jesus taught his disciples to pray. Forgive us our debts, even as we forgive those who wrong us, who do against us. And so notice, don't be the one who tries to render to the man according to his deeds. Let God do that. He will do that. Now, Proverbs chapter 24, verse 12 said something similar to that. We finally come to our final episode, and it's going to be quite a few verses. So we're just looking at the first section here. This is the sluggard. We've been to the sluggard before. We've seen him on the way, and here we see him on the way. I passed by the field of the sluggard, and by the vineyard of the man lacking sense. Notice the field of the sluggard, the man lacking sense. That is two ways of saying the same thing. The sluggard just doesn't lack any sense. The lazy person. And he passed by the field, verse 31, and behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down because, fields need to be maintained. Walls need to be maintained. Vineyards need to be maintained. And he's too lazy to do that. And so the sluggard hasn't been doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's lacking sense. When I saw, we're still on the same same proverb. When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction. So he sees it, he thinks about it, and then he gives us this proverb, which we have seen this elsewhere. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, gave us essentially the same proverb, although we're going to have a slight difference in our translation here. Here's the proverb that's being quoted: a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. That's almost like a little song sort of thing, the song of the sluggard. And then verse 34, then your poverty will come as a robber. Now, that's not the way we translated it back in Proverbs chapter 6. We actually translated the same phrase, your proverb will come like a vagabond. Frankly, let me just say, I looked at not just the New American Standard, but even the Legacy Standard Version, which is an update, and they usually iron out some of these differences. I think they missed it here. Now, maybe they were intentional. I don't want to second guess them. Um, and we'll look at the Hebrew word here. Then your poverty will come as a robber, and your want like an armed man. And of course, the idea is that the sluggard doesn't need somebody to break in and steal from him because he's already doing it to himself. Um, Notice, as a robber and like an armed man, I would suggest that the second line helps explain the first, if there's any question about the first line, and I think there might be in the eyes of some. You see, the King James rendered it, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want like an armed man. Now that's actually literally correct. Derek is the Hebrew word. And it means going on the way. You could say the one that travels, one on the way. Although I suspect this is a figure of speech, just like we can use an old English term, a highwayman. A highwayman is not just somebody that travels on the highway. I mean, you would call me a highwayman because I drive on the highway, but that's not what the term meant back in Old English. It meant one who was a robber, one who held up others on the highway. And I think that might be the idea here. Indeed, the New International Version captures the same idea, and poverty will come on you like a thief. Now, was it a thief or robber? You could have taken that term either way, and scarcity like an armed man. Um, it seems to me that Proverbs chapter 6 and this proverb could have been rendered the same way because it's essentially the same word. And so pick one and go with that. A vagabond, of course, the vagabond might be stealing, as he goes along the way. So I think each of these captures a sense of it. But I think I might go along with the way the New American Standard rendered it here, a robber or a thief, and like an armed man. But the point is, don't be lazy because you're robbing yourself. You're only robbing yourself. And this brings us to a close of this entire section. Next time, we'll start a whole new section of the Proverbs, a section that was gathered a long time after the life of Solomon. But we'll see that next time.